Hello everyone, my name is Russell Brewer. I'm an Associate Professor of Criminology at the University of Adelaide. So today it is my, and to be honest, really it's going to be Katie's pleasure to be presenting you some of the latest data coming out of a 5-year longitudinal research project, ARC, Australian Research Council funded longitudinal research project of about 2,000 kids across South Australia. Looking at the links between how young people use technology and pathways into various forms of cybercrime. So I'm going to hand it over to Katie, who's going to walk you through our findings. Take it away, Katie.
Thank you, Russell. That will never get old. All right, so I've been working as a postdoc on this project for the last couple of years with colleagues listed here as sort of Russell introduced the ARC project. So starting off just with a bit of background on how it all came about. So in 2015, Goldsmith and Brewer proposed the novel criminological theory, digital drift theory, which was building on Marx's traditional drift theory. And they sort of proposed that certain criminogenic features of the internet make it quite easy for young people to drift in and out of engaging in crime online. So these features include technosocial aspects, so things like being able to connect with anyone at any time globally, being able to remain anonymous, and having access to large pools of data when being or interacting online. And so those technosocial aspects may make it quite easy to sort of engage and disengage from criminal communities and behaviours when being online. They proposed that there was a particular vulnerability for young people as well to drift in and out of these behaviours, given that this is an age group that's really focused on risk-taking behaviours, exploring and identity formation. And so for that group of young people who are spending increasing amounts of time online and are sort of the age group that are online the most, it may be quite easy for them to, engage in sort of playful or exploratory behaviours and have that escalate into more serious forms of offending. But we don't really know much about young people and how technological or social aspects may lead to their engagement in cybercrime. So the research is quite limited in this space. It's sort of either looked at college samples rather than actually surveying adolescents and finding out what they're specifically doing, or it's looked at sort of just one age group rather than over time. Or it's looked at one particular form of cybercrime rather than a broad range of different behaviours that may actually intersect. So enter the Digital Youth Survey. We aim to address all of those gaps. And so this is sort of the first study to look longitudinally at what young people are doing online, what sort of opportunities are arising, and then how is that leading to their engagement in cybercrime or cyber-deviance. So it was longitudinal paper-based survey. We went into 18 high schools over 4 years. We started with about 2,000 students, and we surveyed the whole cohort of Year 8 students in each of those 18 schools and followed the same ones up again each year until they were in Year 11. So it sort of tracked from when they're around 12 or 13 up until 16, 17 years of age. Of course, as is the case with longitudinal research, we had some attrition over the waves as well, but we sort of ended up with 970 by the time they were in Year 11. And our total sample, we had a fairly even distribution of socioeconomic backgrounds. We had a large proportion of Caucasian students and an even split of males and females. And so we wrapped up end of last year with the last wave of the survey, and so we've got 4 waves of survey data to analyse now, which is incredibly exciting. So what have we got to look at? The survey was quite comprehensive, went for about half an hour, so we had a few groans from students in the classroom when we went in, but they got to not do schoolwork and do the survey instead, so I think they were happy to do it. And we asked about sort of 3 broad categories of engagement. So we asked about individual attributes, so those demographics that I just spoke about. We looked at their level of self-control, so their sort of propensity for risk-taking behaviours, and what they were engaging in offline in terms of crime and delinquency, so physical delinquency. Then we looked at their digital engagement, so what are they doing online that's not sort of classified as deviant, so also what devices they have access to, their level of skill in using those devices, their time, what they're doing online, so how often they're interacting with others or whether they're physically alone, and then their different types of tasks that they're doing. And then our final category is looking at what they were doing in terms of cybercrime or cyber-deviance. So we measured sort of 7 different categories here, which I'm going to go into more on the next slide. But it was a range of things that would be classified as crimes, but also deviant behaviours that may lead into criminal behaviour. So I'm just going to focus for today's talk on looking at sort of our prevalence rates of cyber-deviance as the students aged. I'm not going to go into the descriptives of the other 2 variables here, but if you have any questions later on, happy to answer those. So this is the prevalence across each wave of our survey of student engagement in those 7 forms of cyber-deviance. So these rates may seem quite high, but within each category, we asked a number of different questions about their engagement in each category. And if students responded that they engaged, even once in one of those activities, they were included in these numbers here. So while the prevalence rates may seem quite high, the engagement was often in lower level forms of that behaviour, and it was quite episodic, so it wasn't happening too frequently. So I'm going to just go through now and see what we found in terms of the average development across the year levels. So we found that students were engaging in cyber fraud, and that was increasing as they aged. So that's things like lying about your identity online. We just heard a lot about fraud, tricking people into sending you money, that sort of thing. And so that was peaking sort of around year 10. Cyber sex, which is sort of a range of sexual expression online. So it's things like sending or receiving sexual content of yourself, either with or without another person's permission as well. And we see rapidly increasing rates of that as students were aging, which is, in line with that developmental age period, and it's the sexual expression, exploration, that sort of stuff. So we ended up with almost 70% engaging in that by the time they were in year 11. And then cyber violence and cyber hate refers to either passive viewing or active sharing of extreme violent material or material that is representing discrimination against another group or person. And we found that there were escalating rates as students aged across these behaviours as well, sort of peaking around, again, almost 70% by the time they're in year 10 and 11. Piracy, we had about 50% engaging in that, so that's, classic torrenting, things like that, copyright, that sort of thing. That was increasing as students aged as well. And then we had harassment, which did not differ across the waves. We had about 10% of students engaging in that. So that's sort of like cyberbullying, which you're probably thinking, surely that must be higher. But this is very in line with other cyberbullying research, which looks at self-reported engagement in cyberbullying. And it can be quite hard to sort of grasp that as a concept sometimes because it's not often an active or, they're not knowing that they're cyberbullying. It's sort of more of a perception on the victimisation side. So we saw around 10% were actively engaging in that. And then hacking as well. So that's things like sort of a lower level hacking, I suppose. So things like breaking into someone's online account or device to either just view content or to download or change things as well. And that was fairly stable across all waves as well, with about 30% of students. So by the time students were in year 10, we saw 90% of all of our sample were engaging in some form of cyber-deviance. But again, like I said, it was usually quite episodic or those lower level forms of the behaviour. So that was just our overall sample. Then what we've done is sort of a more nuanced analysis and looking at whether there are students who are engaging in similar forms of cybercrime at similar rates across the wave, so as they age. And to do this, we ran the group-based joint trajectory modelling. Just for the purpose of the analysis, we had to reduce our 7 cyber-crime, cyber-deviance items to 5. So what we did was just pull out those passive activities from the violence, hate and sexual scales and put them together. So things like viewing the inappropriate content. And then the active items, so the sharing of sexual content, sharing of hate, sharing of violence, we put those together as well. And reliability analyses indicated that those were sort of appropriate groupings to make. So what we found was 3 distinct groups of students who were engaging in different forms of cybercrime at the similar rates of acceleration. So we've deemed them sort of the low, moderate and high groups, and I'll sort of just talk through each one of those. So our low at the top represented the majority of our sample, so that was about 58% of students. So 58% of students were generally abstaining from all forms of cyber-deviance, but there was a little bit of engagement in the more passive side of just viewing that inappropriate content, but generally they weren't doing much else. Then our moderate group made up about 1/3 of the sample with 35%, and these were students who were engaging a little bit in all forms of the cyber-deviance activities. They were sort of escalating into those passive behaviours more as they aged. And then there was sort of a moderate, stable engagement in piracy as well. And then finally, we had 8% of our sample, which made up our sort of high group. So these were students who were escalating across all of behaviours as they were aging, except for piracy, which remained fairly high and stable across the years. So what we've then done is look at, well, what differentiates these groups? And this is very overwhelming, and I'll speak to it a little bit more. But pretty much what we did is we looked at how those groups differed on those sort of drift variables, so individual characteristics and technosocial opportunities. And we found that these factors here are ones that there were significant differences between those groups on these different factors. But just to sort of summarise what that shows, we found that those who were engaging in more versatile forms of cyber-deviance and were escalating more frequently, so those who were in groups 3 and 2 compared to group 1, were more likely to be male. They were more likely to engage in offline delinquency, so those physical delinquency variables, and then they were more likely to have a greater number of devices. They had a greater skill level. They were spending more time online. So, for example, those in group 3 were spending almost 10 hours on average per day compared to the other group average of 7.5. And they were spending more time carrying out specialised tasks. So that's things like coding, using cloud software, and just more things that require more technical skill. And they were spending more time being physically alone while they were online, so not having anyone around them. And so importantly, what we found was that these group differences were present from when students were in year 8. So before they were even escalating into some of these more serious behaviour or more frequent behaviours, we were able to pick out that there were these differences that were present. So overall, what we found was that there was quite prevalent and increasing engagement across a number of forms of cyber-deviance in our adolescent sample. We found that it was often episodic and lower level forms, but we provided evidence for digital drift here. So we're showing that there were those individual characteristics and technosocial factors that were sort of leading to greater engagement in some of these cyber-deviant behaviours. And what does it all mean? So I guess importantly, it shows that maybe instead of universal prevention strategies, we think about more targeted prevention strategies, those secondary ones that we've heard spoken about a bit today. So really picking up, looking at what children are doing online from as early as when they're in year 8, where we're seeing these differences before they're escalating into some behaviours, and really maybe targeting those at-risk students before they are escalating. But of course, there's more to be done as well in terms of research. So our survey measured a number of other psychosocial variables. We looked at psychological strengths and difficulties. We also looked at peer influence and peer engagement as well. So what we want to sort of continue doing is looking at how those different trajectories differ based on those variables as well, and sort of have a more comprehensive understanding of those risk factors that we want to pick out when students are young. And of course, this is also done in a South Australian sample, so we want to look at, extending that to other parts of Australia as well, to really extend the findings. So that's all from me, and I'll answer any questions or if you have any for now.